A message was written for you in the quietest hour of the night, but it was not sent when the words were first formed. The person you love sat with their phone glowing in their hands, reading the same lines again and again, wondering whether pressing one small button would bring you closer or close the door forever. What they finally sent was called a final message, yet hidden beneath those words was a truth they had never been brave enough to say aloud. And before this story reaches its end, you will understand why their silence was never the absence of love. The room around them was nearly dark. A thin line of amber light slipped beneath the curtains from a street lamp outside, falling across the floor like a path that led nowhere. An untouched glass of water rested beside them. The clock had moved far past midnight, but sleep had not come. Every time they closed their eyes, they saw a different memory of you, the way you once tried to hide your disappointment behind a smile, the pause before you said goodbye, the moment your eyes asked a question your lips refused to speak. They had spent so long convincing themselves that time would make everything easier. They believed distance would soften what they felt. They thought new routines, crowded rooms, ordinary conversations, and busy days would eventually turn your memory into something quiet and manageable. But that night, something unexpected happened. They found an old voice message from you, one they had forgotten to delete, and the moment your voice filled the room, every carefully built defense began to crack. You were not saying anything dramatic in that recording. You were laughing about something small, something almost meaningless. Yet beneath your laughter was a warmth they had not found anywhere else. They listened once, then again, then a third time. Each replay carried them back to a version of themselves they had almost abandoned, the version who still believed love could feel safe, honest, and unforced. That was when the first line of their message appeared on the screen. I don't know whether I still have the right to say this. They stared at those words for several minutes. What right were they speaking about? The right to miss you? The right to explain? Or the right to return after allowing silence to stand between you for so long? The answer was more painful than they wanted to admit. They knew that somewhere along the way, they had made you carry uncertainty that belonged to them. Their confusion had become your burden. Their fear had forced you to question your worth. Every time they stepped closer and then pulled away, you were left wondering what you had done wrong, when the truth was that you had done nothing wrong at all. Still, they did not send the message. They deleted the first line and started again. This may be the last time I reach out. That sentence felt colder, more final, but also safer. It placed a wall around their heart before you had the chance to respond. They told themselves they were protecting both of you, yet deep inside, they knew they were still trying to control the outcome. If they called it the last message, perhaps rejection would hurt less. If they pretended to be ready to walk away, perhaps you would never see how desperately they hoped you would ask them to stay. Then the phone rang. It was not you. A close friend had noticed they were awake and called without warning. At first, your soulmate almost ignored it. But something made them answer. Their voice sounded distant when they said hello. The friend was quiet for a moment before asking, "Are you thinking about them again?" Your soulmate looked down at the unfinished message. "I never stopped," they admitted. The confession changed the air in the room. It was the first time they had spoken those words to another person without hiding behind humor or changing the subject. There was no dramatic music, no perfect speech, only the hum of the room and the sound of their own breathing as the truth finally became real. The friend did not comfort them immediately. Instead, they asked a question that landed harder than expected. If you never stopped loving them, why have you acted as though losing them was acceptable? Your soulmate had no answer. For months, they had blamed timing. They had blamed circumstances, misunderstandings, responsibilities, old wounds, and the fear of making promises they might fail to keep. Some of those reasons were real. But beneath every reasonable explanation lived a simpler truth: loving you had made them feel exposed. You had seen beyond the version of themselves they showed everyone else, and being known that deeply had frightened them more than loneliness ever had. They remembered one particular evening with painful clarity. You had been standing near a doorway, waiting for them to say something that might change the course of everything. The room had smelled faintly of rain because the windows were open, and water tapped softly against the glass. You had asked, "Do you actually see a future with me?" They had looked at you. They had known the answer. But instead of saying yes, they said, "I don't know." What they meant was, "I am afraid I will ruin something this precious." What you heard was, "You are not someone I can choose." That memory returned with such force that they pressed a hand over their face. For the first time, they understood that intention could not erase impact. They may not have meant to break your trust, but you had still been left gathering the pieces. The friend's voice softened. You keep saying you wanted to protect them. Did you ever ask what they needed protection from? Your soulmate closed their eyes. They had assumed you needed protection from their imperfect life, their uncertain future, their unfinished healing. But perhaps you had never needed perfection. Perhaps you had only needed honesty. Perhaps the most painful thing had not been their fear, but the way they disguised it as indifference. After the call ended, the room felt different. Nothing outside had changed. The street lamps still glowed. The clock continued moving. Yet the message on the screen no longer felt like a goodbye. It felt like a doorway. They began writing again, this time without trying to sound strong. I called this my final message because I was afraid to call it the truth. They paused, but they did not delete it. I have spent too much time acting as if silence was the mature choice. It wasn't. Silence was easier than admitting how deeply I care about you. It was easier than facing the ways I hurt you. And it was easier than asking whether there is still a place for me in your life. Their fingers trembled as they continued. They told you about the voice recording. They admitted they still remembered details they had pretended to forget. They remembered the name of the song you once played in the car. They remembered how you always looked toward the sky when you were searching for the right words. They remembered the exact way your voice changed when you were trying not to cry. But then the message took an unexpected turn. They did not ask you to come back. Not yet. Instead, they wrote, "I need you to know that I finally understand what I did." Those words carried more weight than any declaration of love. For so long, you may have imagined that they moved forward untouched while you were left carrying the questions. You may have wondered whether your absence had affected them at all. The truth was that losing access to your heart had changed the rhythm of their entire life. They had noticed it in ordinary moments. Whenever something beautiful happened, you were still the first person they wanted to tell. Whenever they entered a crowded place, some part of them searched for your face. Whenever someone new tried to become close, they found themselves comparing the connection to the honesty they once shared with you. But comparison was not the deepest revelation. The deeper truth was that they had spent months attempting to replace a feeling that had never been about excitement alone. What they missed was not simply romance. They missed the sense of being understood without performing. They missed the calm that came when you were near. They missed the person they became around you, the person who laughed more freely, spoke more honestly, and imagined life beyond mere survival. Still, the message remained unsent. Their thumb hovered above the screen. A new fear appeared. What if you had already healed? What if their honesty arrived too late? What if sending the message reopened a wound you had finally learned to live with? For several minutes, they considered deleting everything. Then they saw something that made their heart stop. Your name appeared at the top of the screen. You were typing. The 3 small dots appeared, vanished, and appeared again. Your soulmate sat frozen, staring at the screen. They had not sent a single word, yet at that exact moment, you had opened the conversation too. Had you been thinking of them? Had you written your own message? Or had you simply touched the screen by accident? The dots disappeared. No message came. Your soulmate exhaled slowly, but the coincidence shattered the final excuse they had been holding. They could no longer pretend the moment meant nothing. They could no longer keep waiting for perfect certainty. Love had already been damaged by hesitation. More hesitation would not heal it. So they returned to the final paragraph. This was the part they had avoided writing, because it contained the decision that might change everything. I am not sending this to pressure you. I am not asking you to forget what happened. I am sending it because you deserved the truth from me long ago. I loved you when I was silent. I loved you when I acted uncertain. I loved you even while I was running from what loving you required of me. They stopped again. Then they added one more sentence. But love that remains hidden cannot build a life. That sentence changed the meaning of the entire message. For the first time, they were not speaking only about feelings. They were speaking about responsibility. They understood that love was not proven by private longing, sleepless nights, or memories guarded in secret. Love had to become visible through choices. It had to step out of the imagination and enter the real world, where apologies might not be accepted and hope might not be returned. Your soulmate was finally prepared to risk hearing the answer they feared. Yet there was something else they had not told you, something that had happened earlier that evening. Before finding your voice recording, they had received an opportunity that could take them far away. It was the kind of opportunity people are expected to accept without hesitation: a new beginning, a different city, a chance to leave old pain behind. Everyone around them had called it perfect timing. At first, they agreed. They believed leaving would settle everything. New streets would not carry your memories. New rooms would not echo with unfinished conversations. Distance would make the final separation feel official. But when they opened the documents they were supposed to sign, they saw the departure date. It was the same date you once chose for a promise neither of you had been able to keep. The coincidence brought back the night when you had spoken about the future as though it were a place you might reach together. You had imagined where you could live, what mornings might look like, and how simple happiness could feel when shared. At the time, your soulmate had listened quietly, secretly wanting everything you described, yet terrified to admit it. Now they were being offered a future that contained every practical advantage but no you. That was the real reason for the final message. They had to make a decision before sunrise. Leave without telling you the truth, or remain long enough to discover whether your story had truly ended. Their hands rested over the phone as the first pale light of morning began to appear behind the curtains. The darkness in the room slowly faded, revealing the details that had been hidden all night: the open suitcase near the wall, the unsigned papers on the table, and one small photograph placed face down beside them. They picked up the photograph. It was a picture of you together. On the back, in your handwriting, was a sentence they had not noticed before. Some people feel like home before life teaches us how to stay. Your soulmate read it twice. Then they began to cry, not loudly, not dramatically, but with the quiet surrender of someone who could no longer deny what their heart had known from the beginning. They placed the photograph beside the unsigned documents. They opened the message one final time and added the words they had been most afraid to write. If there is even a small part of you that still believes we were meant to have one honest conversation, tell me before morning. Because I have a decision to make, and this time I don't want fear to make it for me. Their thumb moved toward the send button. But just before they pressed it, a message from you appeared. Only one line. A line that made them rise from their seat so quickly that the glass of water fell and shattered across the floor. Because somehow, without knowing what they had written, you asked them the exact question that could change the decision waiting beside the open suitcase. And when your soulmate read your words, they realized this was no longer the end of your story. It was the moment both of you would finally have to choose what happened next. My beloved child. The words on the screen were simple. Before you make any decision, can we finally tell each other the truth? Your soulmate stared at the message as if time itself had stopped breathing. The shattered glass remained scattered across the floor. Dawn continued to brighten the room. The unsigned documents rested on the table beside the open suitcase. Yet none of those things mattered anymore. One honest question had accomplished what months of silence never could. It had broken through every excuse, every fear, and every carefully built wall. For the first time in a long while, they did not hesitate. Their fingers trembled as they pressed send. The final message was no longer trapped inside the phone. It was finally on its way to you. The seconds that followed felt longer than entire seasons. Every heartbeat carried uncertainty. There was no guarantee your heart had remained open. There was no promise that love alone could erase pain. Some wounds require more than beautiful words. They require courage, accountability, patience, and the willingness to rebuild what once seemed impossible. Then your reply appeared. I've been waiting for honesty, not perfection. Your soulmate covered their face as tears quietly escaped through their fingers. They had prepared themselves for rejection. They had rehearsed goodbye after goodbye. But they had never imagined that what you wanted most had never been flawless answers. You had simply wanted the truth they had been too frightened to speak. Minutes later, neither of you was hiding behind messages anymore. A phone call replaced the silence. At first, neither of you spoke. You simply listened to each other's breathing. Strange how two people can recognize home through nothing more than the sound of another heart waiting on the other end of a line. Finally, your soulmate whispered the words they should have spoken long ago. "I'm sorry for making my fear look like a lack of love." The silence that followed was different this time. It wasn't empty. It was healing. You answered softly. "I knew you were carrying something. I just didn't know if you would ever trust me enough to let me carry it with you." Those words settled into every hidden corner of their heart. For so long they believed love meant protecting someone from every storm by facing it alone. Now they understood something far more beautiful. Real love does not ask one person to carry every burden. Real love invites two imperfect hearts to walk through uncertainty together. As the conversation continued, old misunderstandings slowly unraveled. The moments that once seemed impossible to explain suddenly made sense. The unanswered messages. The sudden distance. The conversations that ended too quickly. The smiles that hid exhaustion. Neither of you had stopped caring. You had simply been protecting yourselves in different ways. One by running. The other by waiting. And both of you had become lonely while believing you were saving the other. Morning sunlight slowly filled the room. Your soulmate looked once more at the travel documents. Hours earlier, they represented escape. Now they represented a choice. Without dramatic speeches or second thoughts, they folded the papers, placed them back inside the envelope, and quietly set them aside. Not because love demanded sacrificing every opportunity, but because no future was worth chasing until unfinished truth had finally been faced. Days passed. Neither of you rushed to pretend everything was suddenly perfect. Trust returned slowly. Conversation after conversation. Apology after apology. Laughter carefully found its way back into places where silence had once lived. You began discovering each other again, not as the people you remembered, but as the people you had become through every lesson life had written across your hearts. Some evenings were filled with joyful conversations. Others required difficult honesty. Yet every difficult conversation ended with greater understanding instead of greater distance. That was the miracle. Not that pain had never existed, but that neither of you chose to let pain write the final chapter. One afternoon, your soulmate brought the small photograph that had rested beside the unsigned papers. They showed you the words written on the back. Some people feel like home before life teaches us how to stay. You smiled through grateful tears. I forgot I even wrote that. Your soulmate smiled back. I almost forgot how true it was. In that quiet moment, neither of you promised a perfect future. Instead, you promised something stronger. To choose honesty before assumptions. Conversation before silence. Grace before pride. And hope before fear. Because lasting love is rarely built in dramatic moments. It is built through countless ordinary choices made with extraordinary faithfulness. As the seasons quietly changed, so did both of your hearts. The places once filled with uncertainty became places of peace. The memories that once caused pain became reminders of how far healing had carried you. Looking back, your soulmate finally understood why that message had been called the final message. It was never meant to be the final goodbye. It was the final message written by fear. Everything after that belonged to courage. And perhaps that is the deeper truth hidden inside this story. Sometimes the ending you fear is only the ending of hesitation. Sometimes the goodbye you expect becomes the doorway to the conversation that changes everything. Sometimes love waits patiently not because it enjoys silence, but because it believes truth will eventually find its voice. So if this story has touched your heart today, let it remind you that hope often arrives quietly.